Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on classics in neuroscience. We have been looking at theoretical neuroscience and how we can consider the brain as a computer and the computer as a brain. In this video, we will look at the topic of how we can reach networks of realistic neurons and what was von Neumann's last word on this topic. This is crucial because all along we have modeled neurons as binary. If they are having an action potential, the output is 1, there is no action potential, the output is 0. All along, proper neuroscientists like us have been shouting that, hey, but what about the extensive dendritic trees? For example, the Purkinje neurons of the cerebellum have 250,000 dendrites. The medium spiny neurons in the basal ganglia have hundreds of thousands of dendrites. What about that? So, there are so many inputs that these neurons take, the output is just a 1 or a 0, but how do they process this information? You cannot assume that the basic computational unit in the brain is a neuron. This is the topic of this discussion, today's video. So, the fundamental problem in modeling of the central nervous system was that it had many unrealistic components. So, the branching patterns of dendrites were essentially butchered down to a single cell body. There are no branches, but that is ridiculous for proper neurophysiologists, neuroanatomists, neuroscientists in general. Wow, this is just ridiculous, this is not our field, we are not interested in listening to you because you are essentially cutting the beautiful branches of our neurons and we are not interested, for example. And the synaptic inputs are distributed at specific levels of the dendritic tree. Instead, the models have all of this focus on the cell body node alone. The axonal connections onto specific target cell bodies and dendrites are exploded into random, all-to-all interactions. So, there are a whole bunch of interactions happening between the axons to a whole bunch of neurons. And the differentiation of excitatory and inhibitory one-way synapses are replaced by adjustable synaptic weights in both directions. But this kind of two-directional neurons or reverberatory circuits are rather the special case. We have discussed these in previous weeks. Such reverberatory circuits are exceptions, are not the rules. Mostly you have one way through which communication happens. Right. There was this renewed interest in neural nets with this development of computation, parallel distributed networks, example of the type that was proposed much later in the 1980s by McClellan and Rumelhart, and Hopfield networks 1984. The question is, how do we build real neurons into networks to give us an understanding of the depth of the computational capacity of the real central nervous system? That is the question. Of course, if you were to simulate an entire dendritic tree, you will need a great amount of computational power. So, you will need enhanced computational power to simulate a dendritic tree with excitatory and inhibitory inputs at different levels. People indeed attempted to solve or address such problems. Robert Brayton and Shepard and Michael at the IBM Watson Research Center were building on the work of Wilfred Rahl and Koch to make realistic simulations of dendritic spines with active properties, could function as similar to McCulloch pits like nodes, and their responses to synaptic inputs interacting within the dendritic tree, and to generate the basic logic functions of and, not, and not. It turns out that the computational power of a neuron is greatly enhanced and amplified by the dendritic spines, because these act as local input output units. All these then lead to the final output from the cell body and the axon. Based on this, Shepard reviewed the literature on the new generation of neural networks, and he said, he pointed out the unrealistic nature of these neural networks. Essentially, these simple nodes of the computational neural networks compared with the highly branched architecture of the real neurons and the random interconnections among nodes versus the specific connections that happen between neurons and the simulated converging synapses in comparison with the distributed synapses that happen in the real central nervous system. Actually, John von Neumann had anticipated many of these arguments, and when he was invited to deliver the Silman lectures at Yale on brain and the computer, he could not deliver these lectures because he got cancer. But he did document his thoughts elsewhere. In the 1945 paper on computational architecture, what is the fundamental element that carries out basic logical operations of the brain corresponding to the transistor in a computer? That fundamental element, according to McCulloch and Pitts, for example, is the neuron, because and or are basic operations of logic. Together with no, they are a complete set of basic logical operations. All other logical operations, no matter how complex they are, can be built using these networks as shown in these schematics, which I am sure you can attempt to read. So, these neurons appear to be basic logical organs. But John von Neumann said that actual structure of neurons and the many synapses that it has and that converges on the soma and the dendrites, and the hundreds of synapses, actually sometimes even thousands of synapses on a single neuronal cell, and the combinations of simulations on these characterized essentially not only by the number but also the coverage of specific regions on that neuron, or either on its body or on the dendritic tree, how far away, and so on and so forth. So, John von Neumann concluded that a neuron is more than just the single basic active unit of computation. Rather, the stimulation of a certain combination of synapses on its cell body and not by others essentially gives the output. There is a significant count of basic active organs that must be a count of the synapses rather than the number of neurons. So, John von Neumann correctly concluded that the synapse is the basic computational unit of the central nervous system and not the neuron. This is absolutely critical. The synapse is the basic computational unit of the central nervous system, not the neuron. But there can be millions of synapses. In the human brain that has billions of neurons, you are looking at trillions or more of synapses. It's a huge problem. It's a problem of considerable complexity. So, John von Neumann actually anticipated the modern view of distributed synaptic units over the dendritic tree, that is as shown in the figure. So, there are many dendritic tree and there are many connections. So, this is one and different types. This is an excitatory synapse, this is an inhibitory synapse, and there are many different combinations that happens. And so, he coined this idea that the fundamental element of computation is indeed the synapses, and this together can help us build a functional organization of the brain by understanding patterns of synaptic nodes to whole neurons and to then to microcircuits of interconnected neurons within the region, and finally to the extensive pathways that happen and the systems within the brain overall to help us understand how our brains work. Very complicated topic. So, these are the references that we have used in the last set of videos. Please do read upon them. With this, we come to the end of this video, in which we discussed how we can build networks of realistic neurons and what John von Neumann finally said about this, and that was actually It is not the neuron that is the basic and fundamental computational unit of the nervous system, but rather the synapse. With this, we come to the end of this video. With this, we also come to the end of this week's content. By the way, with this, we also finish the syllabus for the course. In this course, we have started at the level of genes and at the level of signaling molecules, and we have come almost reached to a point where we can discuss the functioning of the entire brain. Our focus and emphasis has been throughout on historical development, on how we can learn from the works of others, how we can stand on the shoulders of giants, and how we can improve on the works of these giants. So, please keep reading, please keep improving. This course by no means is a complete picture of the field. We need to keep reading and we need to keep improving. I hope in future at some point, maybe by next year 2025, we will have specific papers, research articles included in the discussion as an extended 30-hour course, so that this course becomes a bit more complete. Right now our focus has been on the textbook by Shepard, Creating Modern Neuroscience. Please do read from the book. There are other courses that I am offering. There are other courses that are offered in NPTEL in the field of neuroscience. For those who are interested in more advanced courses, there are other courses that are being offered. Please do check the NPTEL portal for those. With this, I formally end my lectures, series of lectures in this topic of classics in neuroscience. It's been a wonderful experience learning along with all of you. Thank you very much for your patience and your continued attention and support. With this, we come to the end of this course. Thank you. Jai Hind.